Striking workers of the Transmission Company of Nigeria, TCN, on Wednesday shut down the electricity national grid, causing blackouts across the country. The strike by the workers under the aegis of the National Union of Electricity Employees, NUEE, was triggered by the directive of the TCN board that all principal managers who are in acting capacity must undergo promotion interviews, and also the refusal of the market operator to fund the payment of entitlement of ex-PACN staff as agreed in December 2019. However, following the intervention of the Minister of Labour and Employment, Senator Chris Ngige, the worker strike has been suspended. Speaking with journalists after the meeting with the Minister of Labour and Employment, President of the NUEE, Comrade Joe Ajaero, expressed hope that the federal government will act in good faith on the issue in dispute, which has lingered for years. Joining us right now on this show as we discuss the strike by electricity workers is Arise News analyst Dr. Sam Amadi, former chairman of the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, and Joe Ajaero, president of the National Union of Electricity Employees. Welcome to the morning show, gentlemen. Dr. Sam, good morning.
Thank you.
Yes, it's good to see you. Well,
good morning.
Let's start with you. I understand Comrade Joe Ajaero will join us later. Well, what's your take on all of this? Three issues articulated by the striking electricity employees. And we hear that at the point of privatization, there was an agreement that the staff of TCN will not be required to take promotion exams. Is that true? Is it reasonable for any employer of labor, particularly within the public sector, to agree that employees should dictate, the terms, the conditions, the criteria for staff assessment? Let's start with that.
Okay, thank you very much. First, I'm not aware that there was that specific agreement that staff will not take promotion exam for promotion post-privatization. What I can say is that because TCN was not being privatized, much of attention might not be in some of the agreements. We know that the BPE was leading that, but NEC was providing policy, regulations and other market-related support. But what I can say, so if that contract exists or that agreement exists, and of course, I won't be surprised that it does, because one of the things that happened in that period was the haste, maybe explainable and justifiable, to dispose of these assets, made government enter into too many unreasonable and sometimes really not beneficial from a public policy perspective agreements. And I had cause to really tell Ajaero, my friend, was that they got the best bargain I've seen anybody get in this industry. Before I came to NEC, I had done some research and published a book on privatization. My argument then was that the way we did it was kind of a lot of sweetheart. We rolled in a lot of sweetheart deals in order to move labor away from its strong opposition. One can argue that that's a reasonable, maybe in the context, a reasonable position to sweeten labor out of resistance. We do know from history of privatization all over the world that one of the things you encounter is pushback by organized labor. And that's why in the UK, and even in the US under Reagan, when they started with privatizing aviation, the first thing that they did was to remove most of the labor law protection, go against unionization as a way of freeing, removing the constraints to privatization. So learning from that, and of course in the UK we saw what happened with Thatcher and the labor union. So I think the idea was, look, it wouldn't get any headway except either you blow away labor or seduce labor. And so these agreements are very reasonable, but why would any entity whose premise is efficiency, especially a transmission network that is non-discriminating dispatch, meaning that it has to be at the best state of readiness to wheel, schedule, power wheel, and coordinate movement of electricity from generation up to distribution. It's critical. It's the backbone of the value chain. It backstops everything. And so that's why you need the highest level of efficiency, because it's critical and fragile. Any small error, any inefficiency, it's like virus. It kind of goes through the whole system and collapses everything. And that's where management will focus on promotion based on merit and competence. So yes, it's unreasonable in the sense that what that gives is a guarantee against efficiency. So anybody who is on that job, even if they stop learning, even if they stop being competent, just have to go to the next level. So that's not the kind of thing we needed to do. I had a chance to once tell the president, then Goodluck Jonathan, at the meeting, I said, this is the most expensive privatization. If you look at how much we paid out to workers, labor, who are in the position to allow them to be transitioned out, and the fact that they are all back, almost all back to their beats. They never left anywhere because it's not possible to reinvent staff for the electricity company after privatization. So what we did was we paid them off and kept them in the job. And now, in terms of bargaining chip, they are stronger than the government in terms of, Ajaero and his group have a strong hold on the system. So one of the things is I've argued that, look, maybe we should have privatized or had a more sustained conversation around privatization and privatize in the manner that maybe these new companies take their staff, deal with them as they can, as they want. But look, the danger is investors will be afraid of pushback by organized labor. So the first recommendation was government get these guys out, but we didn't do that very well. And so what we are reaping today is a sense in which a bargain that we had because we wanted to privatize at all costs, maybe without due prudence, or because public sector experience shows that Nigerian government particularly, cannot manage business or any type of enterprise. We see in the US, for example, US Postal is as efficient as FedEx or DHL. We see in Canada as well. In the UK, we see a few examples of well-run public enterprise. But in Nigeria, even corporatization alone is difficult. To commercialize is difficult. So the political rent is difficult to be dislodged. And so maybe that's why we swallowed all this, and today the labor has a chokehold on the system. And because of administrative and managerial issues, the country was thrown into darkness. Underline that this market does not just suffer from financial frailty and does not suffer just from technical frailty, but suffers from even human resource frailty. Even if we get the markets right, get the financing right, good tariffs, the entities are financially buoyant. Even if our technology, the SCADA system is on and TCN can coordinate properly, you still run a risk that somebody will switch off the light because he didn't pass promotional exam. And so that underlines really the critical state of this industry. And I relate it mostly to an improperly conceived and improperly, maybe hastily packaged privatization exercise. We should privatize, but then maybe we should have been more phased, more strategic, and fought the hard battles with labor, sort out these issues even before we proceeded. Maybe that's a counterfactual, but others can argue that there was an extreme urgency to dispose to privatize and then hope that the magical market, invisible hand of the market, will incent efficiency and they will have what to have to. But this example underlines that maybe that argument was not, it's not the right one. Right? We needed to do the heavy lifting as a state before we transitioned into a privatized electricity market.
So what do we do now, Mr. Sam Amadi, since we're in this quagmire that unions can hold us by the jugular for the want of any reason possible? They can go turn off the power switch. And Joe Ajaero was saying yesterday that they've just suspended this for 2 weeks, but they can bring it back. So probably in 2 weeks' time, even though a deal was reached, maybe he could probably go with the man and get into there once again and just turn off the switch as usual and come back again and put everybody in jeopardy. So what do we do? Because, the Yorubas have a saying, and I think I'll say it in Yoruba before I translate to English for effect. Ijoba bari bilibin wole. What it means is that the day we see evil, that's the day evil must get into the ground. So how do we stop this?
Very good question. Again, you see, I like to think strategically. In strategy, you diagnose the landscape, you look at your enemy, you look at their challenges, opportunities. First is that, look, Ajaero is a very tenacious, resilient, courageous, and smart labor leader. He understands how to play to his constituency. First, look at the demand. They are asking for also ex-NEPA officers who have not been paid to be paid from market operators fund, which is a fund really that is dedicated to market participants. By definition, the only people who have access to that fund should be those who are providing services, GENCOs, gas suppliers, all the ancillary services, the regulator, and every other person who is part of that market. So they want to be paid because that's a money you can guarantee. You can't guarantee public budget because that goes with a lot of processes, and maybe government will say, no, we're not going to pay these guys, blah, blah, blah. So he ties it to that, and so he wins the support of these workers who also know that some of them are going to exit in the next 2-3 years. So they know that if this works, then they get the benefit. So he has been a resourceful guy. He negotiated the best deal for electricity workers, so they trust him. Now, dealing with that kind of person, government should have been proactive. The first thing is to know that you have this agreement. Agreement is agreement. Then you needed to unlock a process for renegotiation. It's so lazy the way government deals with agreement. Suddenly, overnight, somebody comes up and springs an agreement. 1 year, 2 years, they've not done nothing, they've told you didn't do anything. Then they go and switch off their life. You know your relative vulnerability, that these guys have control today. And you're not ready to roll out the tanks against them. You're not ready to sack everybody and put in the Army Corps of Engineers to get this done. So knowing your vulnerability, you should play to protect that vulnerability. So first thing to do is to enter into good faith discussion. It's true that they've set up a committee. In Nigeria, committee is a way of kicking the can down the road, hoping that in 2 weeks a reprieve comes, magically Ajaero is no longer in the air and nothing happens. Ajaero says, look, 2 weeks is not a lifetime. We're going to be alive and we're going to come back. And the guy who suspend can start again. What they should do right now is let this committee in good faith sit down, review all the issues. Now, if Ajaero wants PMs to become AGM because they have been acting in that position, ordinarily, if people act in a position for too long, the question is, if they didn't have the competence to continue, they should have been stepped down. So there's some presumption that they can fit into that new role. So they should have good faith and say, look, let's not hold on to formalities. If these guys have been acting and we're not going to get smart guys anywhere tonight to fill these places, let's promote them to the positions they're entitled to. We can deal with the fact that we didn't do interview. Yes, ordinarily, we shouldn't have that kind of formality, kind of removed. But because we are in a weak position relatively, we can give that up. Then the issue about market money, you come strong and say, look, this is not doable. But in any case, we need to engage, and not engage when there's crisis. Engage now, engage in good faith. The third issue point I would say is that, look, government must do its risk analysis and have a plan and say, how do we deal with the human resource crisis in this sector? We have seen last 2 years or so when even the discos were shut down because the workers in the discos are also unionized. They listen to the NUEE. So government has to look at the holistic strategy of managing the human resource crisis in the sector. And then maybe we'll go back to rethink and develop both processes. The notion that you can always wave away crisis. We're not proactive. We don't even see crisis as symptoms of underlying disease, that something is not right with the structure of things. Whenever you have a crisis like this, it tells a story around the foundational issues you have in this sector. And so what I would recommend is that, apart from the committee that will go to head of this and maybe try to sweeten Ajaero, sweetheart deal, Ajaero, it's okay, let's give you 6 months or 1 year. Let us now focus on solving this problem. How do we treat electricity workers? For example, is it fair to say that once they leave, those who are discharged before their retirement from these entities because of privatization or other issues, can they have a path back to public service? Should they be precluded if they are qualified, if they meet the requirement, and if they can secure work elsewhere? Should they be denied service in the public sector just because they were preemptively and prematurely kicked out of the service because of a policy commitment, privatization? So these are some of the things we're going to look into, and at a broad space, and be fair and clear. And once we agree, then we have to be strong, to take position and protect the common good. Look, it's really terrible that a country was thrown into darkness because of issues around, mere issues that everybody has in corporations and companies all over the world. Personnel, who should be promoted, who shouldn't be promoted, how should we pay retirement. So those are issues that should have been, agitated offline, if you like. They're discussing it, they're meeting, and we are reading about this discussion. They flare up, they come down, and finally a fair settlement happens. It shouldn't be something that anyone should plug the country into darkness. Even though all is fair in war, and labor unionists will consider bargaining for welfare as war. But again, the state, the government has a strategic responsibility to protect other stakeholders who, for example, somebody says, we pay metered customers who are paying their bill, who bought power. Should they're entitled to access to light. So there are multiples, layers of interest and legal entitlements that government can step in and say, look, this is where you cannot go. We can allow you to do X, Y, Z, but you just can't switch off the light. So there must be some truth-telling, some good faith, and then decisive action, because the economic loss and the social discussion loss, they are huge and irremediable, even if Ajaero calls off the strike, as they have done. These are things we should be looking at. So we need a top-level, strategic, rigorous analysis of what this crisis means for the sector, because this is really threatening. Many investors will see this as a very fragile market, where even if you are financially strong, you are technically strong, operationally strong, you could still suffer huge loss because of mere administrative dispute.
Okay. Dr. Amadi, well, it's good. You are saying that the problem started with the privatization process. I recall, about 2-3 years back or so, a prominent minister in the Buhari government made more or less the same point. And it was vilified. He was even saying the entire process should be dismantled and something else should be done. So I see you are coming around to admit that, yes, there was a problem with the process. However, you said Joe Ajaero is a very smart man. Okay, I can admit that. After all, he's one of us. He used to be in a Vanguard newspaper before he moved on to industrial relations. No doubt about that. But Eyo Ekpo, not the archaeologist, the one that worked with you at the NERC, Eyo Olagoke Ekpo, our colleague, ex-Malabite, like you, like me, right? In a series of tweets yesterday, he has a different opinion of Joe Ajaero. He thinks that what Joe Ajaero has led the electricity employees to do amounts to economic sabotage, amounts to blackmail, amounts to a display of what he calls narcissistic megalomania. And he thinks, like some other people, that in fact, people who provide essential services should not be allowed to go on strike. And there are persons who have said they expected that by this morning, the Nigerian government will have arrested all those people who turned off the feeders and put Nigeria at risk, economy-wise and also security-wise. What do you say to that? As part of those recommendations to prevent this in future.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. Well, first, let's start with, I'm not Eyo. Eyo is my colleague, smart also like Ajaero is smart. But then, let's get it down to, what's Ajaero? I studied public policy, I also studied some sense of social science, sociology. You look at people, cast them in their role, just like a president has a job to do. Ajaero has a job to do. His job is to get the best bargain for workers. So calling him megalomaniac or whatever, Ajaero's job is to say, look, the workers' constituency is clear. Get us the best deal. And Ajaero succeeded. By the way, Ajaero is close to me as a comrade. And I told Ajaero that if I was a minister of power, I wouldn't accept those conditions. Ajaero defeated the government in the privatization effort because they were very, very ideologically, not pragmatically focused on privatization. Privatization is correct. It could be a good policy, depending on context. And the mix should be based contextually defined. And that's the problem with neoliberal market analysis. It's a sense that there's one natural form of market, that is, everything is evolutionary. Things will just happen. The market structure, the logic of the market will just create outcomes. No. I believe in the strategic option that everything depends on how you manage and create it. So Ajaero defeated them, and I was always calling with Ajaero. I said, Ajaero, you just ripped off the federal government. But he didn't do anything wrong. Ajaero defended an interest, and they got the deal. Second, economic sectors, essential sectors. Now think about doctors. What's more essential like that than doctors? Everybody in Nigeria is going to strike in an undisciplined manner because we don't have a disciplined state. How about ministers who supervise a sector? And the Minister of Power was saying at FEC that the labor crisis of human resources crisis in the sector he manages is not his problem, it's a problem of labor ministry. He outsourced total responsibility. So this doesn't concern us. How can a minister sit in a cabinet and say that electricity workers are going on strike and cutting off power because of issues of promotion in their workplace? It's not their responsibility. Is that not total recklessness or lack of understanding about the job? And you want to skin only Ajaero? How about people who signed off an agreement that you should walk into a higher position that requires high level of competence and experience and fit to purpose? And these people sign off and say, once you're a PM, once you're in this role, you enter that position. And then without deliberate effort to renegotiate and convince Ajaero and his team, they simply cavalierly, overlook the whole request, the whole trouble, and then when the light goes off, you say, get Ajaero, execute him. My view is this, that a society moves in dialectics. You have to be careful. You have to look at the forces at play, issues playing around. These are electricity workers. They have a deal, they have a contract. This is a leader of this group, and he sees a weak, not proactive ministry and leadership in the sector. And he goes at the jugular and gets the result. What we'll be talking now is about the design of privatization. And by the way, this is not like new song. When I was NEC chairman, the Minister of Power, called a meeting of all the sectors, all the directors, and said I was a problem in the sector. What's the problem? I took a view, very simple, and I maintain it, that it's difficult to do privatization well because of the political economy. You need, therefore, to be more rigorous and also adapt. So I give you two instances. First, we corporatize, but because the government is not focused and we pay lip service to commercial reality, we did not deepen the commercial content of these entities, the corporate governance. By now, even without privatization, there must be clear system for promotions for everything in an organization, and everybody would know. You develop it through a process, and everybody is a stakeholder. No, this is what the game. This is the game. Everybody knows what it is. So my view is that we made some mistake, and I don't blame BP or anybody. It's because it's difficult to do reform in the context we find ourselves. You are moving to market. At the same time, you have fundamentals that are wrong, and correcting them could take you ages. And when you're doing that, the train will move, the economy will tank, the public sector borrowing requirement gets more difficult to manage, and therefore government had to front-load the process, offload this asset. But the result is that we fail to be strategic and to manage the outcomes and to preempt what will happen and to plan for them. So yes, Ajaero is somebody I know very well. I work with him in the sector. I think it's smart, no debate about it. Whether he should be arrested, I don't think it's about arresting anybody. And by the way, as a unionist, I think Ajaero is not too frightened about arrest. What we should do now is to sit back and say, this is the line we draw. And then when you draw the line, you bring up contingency plan. So if Ajaero crosses this line next time, this is how we will sustain supply. This is how we're going to roll out corps of engineers. Let me assume that our engineers in the military can get the job done. That's what we should be doing now.
Okay, so we've got Mr. Joe Ajaero, General Secretary of the National Union of Electricity Employees, NUEE. Welcome to the show, sir. Was your shutting down of the nation's power sector and shutting down the nation, was it the best thing you could have done in this crisis?
Yeah, that's the only option left for me and my organization at this instant time. The only option. We've tried all other measures. They didn't work.
So to punish over 200 million Nigerians.
Our ability to withdraw our services is the only thing left for us.
So punishing over 200 million Nigerians, letting the economy lose billions of naira, disrupting the state of play in the country just because you can, was the best option for you?
I want to hear him. I'm not hearing him.
You talk to a capitalist who doesn't care how others feel and who enjoys exploitation of others. To that, I don't care if you think I don't deserve my wage.
Well, comrade, you have been accused of blackmail.
Sir.
Comrade, can you hear me? Good morning. You've been accused of blackmailing.
I'm with you, sir.
Yeah, you've been accused of blackmailing the Nigerian government. You've been accused of economic sabotage. You have been accused of impunity. But now, you agreed yesterday that the strike will be suspended for 2 weeks. And you said you expect the government of Nigeria to act in good faith. The same government that was served notice of impending industrial action in May, on May 18, 2022 to be specific. So, are you sure that the government would meet your expectations? And if government does not do so, in 2 weeks' time, will you and your group shut down the electricity sector again?
Okay, let me take a caveat on the use of blackmail. You don't blackmail people when you are asking for a right and on factual basis. The issue of blackmail doesn't arise there. The issue of economic sabotage doesn't arise if a worker is not paid and he withdraws his services. It doesn't arise. Now, on the issue of 2 weeks, whether they will meet up with the demands is another show of goodwill from my side and my organization, that since you have asked for 2 weeks, so be it. And we are going to wait. And that what we call blackmail has been a product of an agreement first reached in 2013, reinforced again in 2019. And now 3 years after, we're here. So if somebody is asking for another 2 weeks, you will be wondering the magic he will use. But like you said, in order not to equally be accused of all the allegations and the charges, that you have listed, one still wants to give 2 weeks. Since that 2 weeks wasn't forced on them, they voluntarily asked for 2 weeks. And one hopes that they will act in good faith, since it was their own volition to ask for 2 weeks.
Okay, what would you say to people that said you've pretty much forced the hand of the government in these negotiations? Because Sam Amadi, Dr. Sam Amadi, somebody you know very well, said you got away with too many concessions, that it was unbelievable what you got away with because the government wasn't strong on their negotiation side. What would you say to people like that?
Well, I think that's admittance of weakness on the part of Sam Amadi, who was the chairman of NEC, why this whole issue was on. I wouldn't expect him to talk now when he's out. He was on the side of government when we were negotiating. If he said, I got so much in the bargain, of course, I shouldn't expect less in getting from high people. But I doubt whether that is the concept, or what he wanted to achieve. Because that he said, I got, is yet to be fully implemented now. And that's what we are still asking for almost 10 years after.
I'm sure Sam Amadi would like to react to that. He said it's an admittance of weakness on your part. What do you say, Dr. Sam Amadi?
Yeah, if he was on government side and said, I got all that I asked for.
Okay.
Yes. I think Ajaero is right. It's a sign of weakness on government, not on my side. I was never part of any of the discussion. By the way, I'm a regulator. Whether you privatize or don't privatize, I was a regulator. I regulate. My view about privatization was very clear. It's documented. And I told Ajaero is my friend. I told Ajaero that he is the one winning the game. And I stand by that. And I don't blame him, like I said here. He has a job to do as a leader. And he showed he was a strong leader. And he did it well. If I was government, I would not even ask workers to be paid out. I will ask workers to remain. And I will privatize in a strategic, gradual way based on the need to do so. I won't privatize ideologically. I made a point clear that because government wanted to privatize in an ideological manner, they had to get everybody out. And getting people out means that, like we say, privatization is a buyer's market. on the type of labor. Privatization is a labor market, meaning the workers are the ones who have the ace, just like the investors have the ace. This is pure theory. If you want to sell an asset, in the first place, the investors know that you are in a difficult, that's what I want to sell. So it's their market. They determine what to buy. That's what they did in the transaction, put in safeguards for themselves. If you want to privatize, the workers know. Ajaero knows that you are in a hurry to sell. And so Ajaero got the best deal for his people. That's the point I'm making. So Ajaero is right, but it's not my own failure because I was never part of it.
Dr. Sam Amadi, Mr. Ajaero, what he said directly was to you, that you were part of that negotiation. That you were. He mentioned you.
No, I was never. Ajaero can't say that.
Mr. Ajaero.
No, he meant government as a regulator. I was never.
Mr. Ajaero, would you react to that?
Yeah, when I say he was, the government side, both the BPE, both NEC, both the Federal Ministry of Power, Federal Ministry of Labor, Office of the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, and all agencies of government put together. And like Sam was saying, the policy issues are not in the hands of the workers. They designed the policy and they came up with it. If I talk of Sam, as a person, Sam wouldn't have supported privatization, and he had so many books to his credit on that. So working on the side of government, and him and Batin Naji working together with BPE and others, government made offer, and we came with offer, and we negotiated. We didn't get all that we wanted, but we reached an agreement. That's the situation.
Okay, comrade.
He's in a better position to advise government on policy issues as the chairman of NEC.
And we're comrade. We don't let's worry too much about her. Our friend Dr. Sam Amadi is, somewhat a socialist. But I'm sure he's hearing me. But I wanted to ask you.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you. In your call to action letter, as part of the reasons for the strike that you listed, you complained about promotion examination. How is the employer asking staff to take promotion exam? How does that contravene what you refer to as conditions of service? I've been trying to find out.
Sir.
And then secondly, you talk about stigmatization by the office of the head of service of the Federation of Electricity Employees, where the letter did not go into details.
Okay,
if you could shed light on those two issues.
Okay, the first one on the issue of promotion. If you have a collective agreement and the contract, which is contained in the condition of service or career path, jointly authored by the union and the management, if you must change any part of it, first you have to wait for the expiration of that. But if you want to change it halfway, the same social partners that agreed on it will sit together to change it. The union can't say, no, we don't agree after signing. The same thing with management. Now, that particular aspect has been in existence. There is promotion interview, promotion exam taking place from officer 1 to even senior manager for you to get to principal manager. And when you get to principal manager, the next one is assistant general manager, which is by appointment, not by promotion. It's because you may have more than 300 principal managers hostling for about 2-3 assistant general managers. Before now, the ministry can do that, or the board. Now, that was why if 400 people go for interview and you have only 2 vacancies, and some of them may go for that interview for 10 years, 15 years, not because they are not passing, but because there is vacancy dependent. That was why we agreed on that. But government, PSN, TCN, or board can call for the review, but not for them to unilaterally, change it overnight. And those people were not meant for interview. Some of them have traveled for the courses abroad, and you say they must appear tomorrow. That was it. The second issue you asked about stigmatization. After privatization, what happened was transfer of staff, assets, and liabilities to new successor companies. Like Sam was saying, you know, they were transferred. They were not retired. They are not pensioners. Those who were retired before this time were placed under the Ministry of Finance with petard paying their pension. Some of them retired in 1960-something, before some of us were born, 1970. So they are the people that retired under defined pension policy that collects their pension for life. And the others from 2013 retired under the contributory pension policy. And none of them is a pensioner, none of them is collecting pension from government. And now for the Ministry of the Office of Head of Service, without any prompting, somebody from NEMSA, when they procured a black market letter, now trying to explain that all the people that left the employ of PSCN cannot work in TCN or any of the successor companies again. In the first instance, the Office of the Head of Service was not part of that agreement. The agreement was midwifed from the Office of Secretary to the government under Pius and in Pius. Now, when they came up with that policy, and we wrote them, telling them that everybody working in the system today, including the MD of the organization of TCN, were former workers. Now, why are you now drawing this distinction? Are you saying that everybody should go, or the people that they disengage, they can't re-engage them? And that is where you can draw experience. Can you please explain to us, from March to May, we are writing letters for, please, can you give us interpretation of this circular? It didn't come. We did an ultimatum. It didn't come. 2-3 times. The ultimatum even expired. It didn't come. And yesterday at the meeting, a permanent secretary in the Office of the Head of Service came openly to say, we don't reply letters from the unions. So in such instance, they don't reply letters and we're seeking for explanation up to date. What do you expect us to do? Although the Minister of Labor told them that you have to acknowledge letters. So that was the situation we found ourselves in.
Oh, okay, I know we have to wrap up, but one question still lingers. But we can't because of time, so we have to let you go. But thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you. Maybe Dr. Sam Amadi will take on this. It's an ideological question anyway. But we've got a breaking news that says Emirates Airline have announced suspension of its flight operations to Nigeria starting from September 1st, 2022. The flag carrier of the United Arab Emirates, UAE, disclosed this in a statement, citing the inability to repatriate its earnings in foreign exchange from Nigeria. Last month, Emirates asked Hadi Sirika, Minister of Aviation, to support the repatriation of its revenue, amounts to $85 million. Nigeria is facing a forex crisis, and this has affected Naira to depreciate against the dollar. The airline says suspension will limit further losses and reduce the impact on its operational costs that can continue to accumulate in the Nigerian market. So that's the story, the breaking news there about Emirates. Real quickly, do we still have Dr. Sam Amadi?
Sure.
Okay, so real quickly. So what do you have against capitalism?
Yes, I'm here.
What do you have against capitalism? Because capitalism has revived the
very
dwindling power sector in
Totally.
Nigeria. So what do you have against capitalism?
And that's a good question. I wanted to say, look, I'm not a socialist. I am of the school of Stiglitz, of Robert Wade, going back to Polanyi, that every market is governed. I believe in a governed market. I'm a capitalist to the extent that freedom of market transactions, but I am a believer like Hamilton of the US, that you have to manage, nurture, and control the market. So for example, I won't be against privatization. I would say before I privatize, I will look at the pragmatics. What do we want to achieve? How can we do it? How can we design against failure? How can we design to maintain the social welfare of workers and social welfare of the people? So I am pro-market to the extent that the market ought to be governed. I'm not a market fundamentalist. And if you look at the history of Asian economic development, you took people who come from our own school of thought, which we call the governed market. They're the ones who created the Asian success. The World Bank made an error and said it was market. But then, of course, we saw Robert Wade in 1992 restore the argument that, look, what happened in Asia was the work of strategists who use public policy to make markets create value for the people. I'm in support of capitalism as free market processes determined by a public sector that is smart, honest, and focused, but not to choose winners or to distort, but rather to use incentive to move market to produce optimal result. I am not a socialist. I'm more of a welfarist. I'm a conservative by culture, a liberal by politics, but I am pro-managed market by economics.
So you like the hidden hand?
I support capitalism as long as it's intelligent. Yeah.
Thank you, Sam Amadi. So, I stand corrected because I called you a socialist. So will it be correct for me to say Sam Amadi is against free market capitalism? Would that be correct? When you talk about government
somebody's against unruly privatization and ideological, not pragmatic.
Thank you very much, great Malabite Sam Amadi.
Thank you.
Thank you.